I am Leona Ryan, and I'm Standing Rock enrollee, and I'm 78 years old. And I have a family of 4 daughters and 2 sons, 38 grandchildren, 23 great and 1 great-great-grandchild. And my parents were Mary and George Many Wounds, also in Standing Rock enrollees. And I was born in Fort Yates, North Dakota, and when I was 1 year and a half, I had an aunt, Elizabeth Dogman. She asked my father and mother to take me because she had no children, and so she took me back down to Little Eagle, South Dakota, and that's where I was raised with 2 grandmothers and my aunt and my uncle. And my aunt had a 2-room frame house, and on one side was a 1-room log house where one of my grandmothers stayed, and over on the other side was another log house where my grandma Alice stayed, and she was my favorite grandmother. And then I had another grandfather and grandmother, Ben and Jenny Hashorns, which lived in Little Eagle, and we went there a lot we in our team and wagon went there a lot went to church and all the activities that were going on. So my grandfather Hashorns had horses, and in them days they had a lot of horses, and there were a lot of paints. So he decided one day that I should have an Indian name. So then they had this powwow. So we went over there, and I always seen this barry. It was made out of poles, and their shade was out of the willows that they put up on top and around. And so my grandfather led this paint mare in with a blanket on her, and he was leading it, and I was walking beside him, and that's how I got my Indian name. Gichiankewi is my Indian name. That means sits beside her. Yeah, that was my that name was given to me. Oh, when I was about 7 years old, I guess. Then, when I was first going to school, I started to school when I was 7, and my aunt said to my grandma Gallus, she said, "I don't know what we're going to do because this girl has to go to school," and they were about 8 miles out of Little Eagle, and a team and wagon was all they had to travel in. So my grandma said, "Oh, I'll take her," and all this was said in Lakota, of course. And so they took me. They went and they put the tent up a few feet from the school, and down in the trees, and they dug a trench around the tent, and they put hay, and then my grandma gathered all kinds of rocks, and I was wondering what she was going to do with them. And she put them in this hole here, and built a fire and let the coals all build up in there and let it kind of die down. And she put all these rocks in there, and then we had a kind of a hole in the middle of the tent where they had some rocks down in there, and then that's where she built the fire, and that's where she did her cooking and stuff. In the wintertime, of course, you couldn't cook outside. So then at night, then she would wrap up these, she had a canvas, and she'd wrap up these rocks and then put them all around our bed. And then at our feet, put the rocks, and that's what kept us warm all winter long. That's how she did. And then I learned very little English because they talk nothing but Lakota language. So then they decided that this couldn't be done all the time. So then they took me to the boarding school up at Fort Yates, and that's where I started my second year of school. So actually my first language was Indian, being that young there. And the boarding school was, I didn't see anything too bad about being at boarding school, because I guess because you're so young you don't realize the things, those kinds of things. But one of the things that has always been vivid in my mind is one thing that I always would have regretted if it was taken away, is my Indian language. Because we had a matron that was Southwest Indian herself, and I'll never forget her name. Her name was Miss Naha, and she always stood around and at night and listened to us talking in our own language, and because she couldn't understand, I suppose, she would come in and they had big wide tape, so she'd tape our mouth shut, and I don't know how long we were punished for talking Indian. But it was never taken away from me. I still value that to this day. And that was one of the main reasons why I think that we never taught our children, because I still talked Indian to my in-laws. My father-in-laws all talked nothing but Indian. But my mother-in-law understood Indian, but she never spoke it. But so I maintained that over the years with the elders, and till after all they were gone, well, then I began to kind of lose the, to express myself in Indian. I began to think, gee, I just can't lose this. And I met a friend, and she passed on now, but she talked a lot of our language. And when I got to know her real well, and we talked, and it all came back, and so today I still talk fluently, and I always regret it that I never taught my children, to talk, because I don't know, I guess it's just because it was, a no-no to us when we went to the boarding school. So that's the only regret I really had being at the school there, because we were well fed, we were well taken care of, clean and everything. But it was just like, if you think back today, you were not allowed to leave the place. My parents, if they came once that 9 months, I was lucky. But my grandma Alice, my aunt that raised me, all came clear up to Little Eagle. Clear up to Fort Yates in a team. It took them 2 days to get up there. And they always brought me the goodies. They brought me the wasna and the, pounded cherries, and just things that I was used to. They bring maybe once or twice that 9 months, because that was such a long ways to travel. And so my grandma Alice was my best friend. She has taught me a lot. And my grandmother on my mother's side was very gentle, very one of the nicest persons I can remember also. Because my grandfather was different. He was one of those kind that really were more talkative, more aggressive, more, he was the boss. So there was the two differences within that. But I stayed with them for a while after I was a little older. And sometimes I'd go back to Fort Yates and stay with my mother, or else go back down to Little Eagle. And, So their upbringing was, I'm sure, was a gentle way, the way I always remembered my childhood. But when they had to go to school, and they sent them to, they were sent away to school. Shamawa, I think my mother went to school in Shamawa. And then my mother first went to school here at Old Kennel, Martin Kennel they called it down here. There's a sister school there. And that's where my mother went to school. And they learned all the basic things in life, as like cooking, washing, cleaning, you know, all that kind of stuff. We didn't, they didn't learn from their own parents. So then they learned that at the sister schools. And so that's where they learned the discipline. To me, I look back that our grandparents didn't have that discipline, the disciplined way that the sisters did to our parents, because they discipline in a harsh way sometimes. So then when my mother started having children, then that's the way they raised us, the way they were raised at the sister schools. And otherwise, because I can remember the punishments that we got for doing wrong were the harsh ways, you know. So and on the other hand, on the grandma's side, I guess, is this where I could come in with that? Or anyway, on the grandma Alice's side and my grandma Jenny up at Fort Yates, they told you constantly, every time they had that chance, to tell you right from wrong, in such a way that a quiet way, not a harsh, mean. They didn't have that kind. I don't remember ever having to deal with that with them, as I did with my mother, because they had the gentleness about them, the kindness about them, and they taught the values that I learned from them were some of the richest values I ever knew, because they always told you no, that isn't the way it is. You know, you do it this way. And anybody said anything, you felt bad, they said, just walk away, you know, just go. And you know, they're the ones that are sinning, you know, they're the ones that are talking. Just don't pay attention, you know. You know, they had, in their day, everything that they had to eat was never to a store, you know. They had to raise everything. They had, and I learned a lot from my own married life, where I had to use a lot of these things that I was taught when I was a child. So. One of the things that I also remember too is they always taught us about being kind to animals, and being that, like, if we had to go pick berries, we'd go with our grandmother to pick berries, and or we'd ride horseback. So we'd go, and as soon as we knew the cherries were ripe, we'd go and we'd break off. The first time I ever remembered, we broke off the branches and we brought back the cherries, and we said, my brother and I, and so we broke off the cherry branches and we brought them back, and she said, you don't do that. She said, that's wrong. So I said, how come? We just brought these back. And she said, because Wakantraka put them there so that they can grow next year. The seeds fall on the ground, and they grow next year. They'll pop up and grow next year for some more. And so don't ever break the cherries or the buffalo berries or the June berries or any of those. Don't break off the branches and you know, throw them on the ground. That's not the way to do. Yeah, there is lots of you know, valuable things that I always used on my own family, and I always told my kids that, you know, those are things that today it's a vast difference. But I was just saying that this morning, that the boarding school days are what to our parents that had to go to the missionaries came in here with good faith, good you know, wanting to teach you, but they thought that you didn't know nothing. And here our elders, grandma, my old grandma and them, had more wisdom in medicine, more wisdom in, like, they could be psychiatrists, the things that they would tell you, you know, in them days. Nobody taught them that stuff, you know. Nobody taught them how to do this or do that, you know. It all just came natural to them. And I said, God put them on this earth that way. Yeah. Let's see, what else was it in my head? Yeah, sharing is one of the valuable things that I learned when I was a child. You always shared. If you gave what you had left to someone else, was one of the things that I learned in my day. I've always somebody to come to your tent or your home, never went out of that place without a cup of coffee, or if you just had bread and coffee to give them. That was always a sharing with the neighbors, you know. And one of the things also is we never called each other. They never called each other by name. Never say Leona or Mary or, you know, Agnes or whatever. There was first the Ina, the Ate, the Lekshi, it's uncle. There's father, mother, uncle, Kui. So you never called your family members by name. Even outside of the family, you still called them by. Everybody was related down the line, you know, whether it's by blood or not. You know, I could have the 16th cousin today. Somebody will come up to me and say, "Oh yes, I'm related to you," and so you know, that's just the way it was. And so we called each other cousin. You know, we out of the immediate family, you called each other cousin. You Jepran was sister-in-law. Jepran was sister-in-law, and Jepran was cousin. And Mitrankala was a young sister. Chue was an older sister. And like I said, Lekshi was uncle. I got that. Let's see, what else was it now? So you had that. The high respect for one another is one of the reasons why we never called each other by name. Always the relation, you know, whatever the relation may be, that's what we called each other by. So today is still that way in our you know, my age. And I always said that those were important things. I think that the closeness, family closeness, you know, kept everybody close together. And we were always taught by our grandparents that as a brother, you had high respect for your older brother, well, younger brother too, but more so whoever's older than you, you had the highest respect from. That's why you called them by their relationship. And Yeah, we were even taught in those days how to take care of our personal needs, how important that was not to leave your personal underclothes and stuff like that laying around, you know. Don't let your boy cousins see these things. Your how to take care of your clothes and one of the things that I always told my kids was when you have your children, you don't leave those diapers laying around and your baby clothes laying around. So if you have your menstrual period, you're not supposed to step over them. Things like that were really a value, you know, because you don't step over them when you have your period. You take care of those things, you know. Yeah, and you know, that's those little things like that was taught to us that never left me anyway. You know, I always used to tell my kids that your children's clothes were sacred because that child is sacred. When it was born, it was born sacred. So you value that child, and you take care of that child. Now today, it's not like that. The children are being neglected. It's nothing for them to, you know, like, say for instance, when I had my children, I nursed all mine except the last one. I couldn't. But that brought a closeness to my family, I think, by nursing my children. And I always taught my girls, my boys, to get along, be good to each other, get along, because you go out of this family into another family, you learn that you have to get along with everybody. And so, you know, I think today my kids are thankful because sure, they had their little differences when they're kids, you know, and they're younger and arguing and stuff, but now when they're older, my daughters are old, you never hear them arguing and fighting among each other, because I tried to raise them like I was raised, humble, you know, you humble yourself, you walk in humbleness, and you see, you greet people, you are kind to people. And my mother always told me, give wholeheartedly from the bottom of your heart, and you will receive double full. And I've always received that double full in my life by being good to people and sharing with people. My kids always said, "Oh, Mom, how come you always have to give everything away?" I said, "Well, that's just my way, you know, that's the way I was raised." Yeah, so, yeah, I got married young. I was 18, and I had all my children. But, you know, in the days that I was raising my children, were tough times, you know. But we always managed. I always had a big garden. I always canned enough so that wintertime my children had something to eat all the time. And I was just always reminisce back on how my mother told my aunt she wanted me back. She wanted so she took me back when I was 12 years old. And my mother had a lot of children, a lot of little children. And my older sister, they moved out, so then I was the oldest, and so I had to help take care of the children. And I remember, I said, when I used to have to carry 2 5-gallon pails of water from the light plant over home to wash clothes, you know, wash by hand. And I had, we used to have to scrub the floor on our hands and knees. Them days we were in the house now, so Um, so I really had a hard life as a young girl, but I don't know, those were just the times. You just took them in stride and did what you were told. In fact, I learned how to bake bread when I was 9 years old. I was 9 years old and my mother taught me how to bake bread. So when I got married, I didn't know how to cook too good, but I could bake bread. Yeah, just, yeah, there's just things that now, you know, when my children were small, Christmas, if they got one toy, they were lucky, you know. Today it's vast difference. It is so much waste, so much, yeah, there's, just thinking back, yeah, the generation today are living a life that that I don't know how it got to a point where things are the way they are today with raising their children. I always told my granddaughters, my granddaughters, you don't want children unless you can take care of them. Don't ever let grandma see you bring a child into this world and cannot take care of that child, because that's wrong. And you have to stop and think about what you're going through when you're going to want to have a child, because today there's so much neglect, and teenagers are having their children so young. And I worked for the tribe. In fact, I was on a council for 4 years. I was on a tribal council. I sure learned a lot of things within the tribal government. And as a woman, there was only two of us women, and at that point in time, they would listen to the women. You know, so there were a lot of things that we couldn't even turn around that we'd like to have turned around because of the things that are happening today. And I've been to Washington D.C. you know, quite a few times. Actually, I guess I should back up, because I only went to the 8th grade. I didn't finish high school. But through experience with raising my own family, and I challenged my way through jobs. I worked in different areas for the tribe, and I learned a lot through working for my people. In fact, it was the biggest challenge I ever took in my life, is to work for my own people. And I can see, being on the tribal council, people don't realize that you can't help one person. You have to think of the whole of the tribe. You have to work with the whole of the tribe, and try to bring in things for all people, not only certain few. And that's where I really was against a lot of things, because for instance, some person wanted to come along and they wouldn't give that person something, but come along another one that's more related or whatever, you give that person. And I used to say that if you can't give to you can't give to one, don't give to the rest of them, But that's just the way tribal government was. Then I worked in several places. And, I was like I said, I challenged my way through a lot of jobs, and I supervised people. I don't know how come and why in them days now that people can't get along. And you just have to, I used to try to, in my job, I used to tell them, I'm your boss, and, that's the way I want it to be. I'm not here as a friend. I have to treat you all alike, but down the line, I have granddaughters working, and I always give them advice. Tell them, you know, you have to know how to treat people. You know, in general, you just have to do it in a nice way. And I don't know. One of the things that I have seen in my day, and my grandmothers and them have lost, I've seen my grandma, when they lose a person close to them, the first thing they do is cut their hair with a knife. Cut their hair off with a knife. And they immediately wore black for a whole year. You know, stayed away from all the activities, whatever was going on. The only thing they didn't stay away from was church. You know, they seen to it that they went to church. Yeah, so I often wondered how way back how they existed. You know, got along. A lot of it you see in movies. You know, you wonder if that's the way it was. You know, just. And one of the things that my grandma used to do is, I know I don't remember it because I was little, but they always carried you on their back. You know, they took a blanket and they wrapped you up and they put you on their back and carry you around. Like, wherever they went, they carried you. Yeah, one of the things, of course, never ever came into existence when I was a child. Later years, I know that they made their own, some people made their own beer and stuff, you know, but we never knew what drinking was in them days. Never knew that till later years, of course, after my grandma was gone and stuff, and they began to. So the drinking really started, I seen in some of my mother's age, you know, that had started out in the bars, going into the bars and stuff. So our grandparents sure never had that. And it's too bad that it was introduced here, you know, and a lot of the downfall today is that's what it is it's the drinking and neglect of your children. You know, today, to me, I think it's wrong for a grandmother to take over the children. I think that my outlook on it is they brought these children into this world and they need to raise them themselves. But the grandmothers took over on them and just because they didn't want welfare to take them. And I don't know, it's really a sad situation because like my grandchildren, my daughters, we never knew what babysitters were in our day. We took our kids wherever we went, we had them with us because that's just the way it was in them days. So my children had my grandchildren, I only babysat them when it was an emergency. When it was time to go, we had to go have a baby or go and something, you know, being in a hospital for a reason, but never for foolishness. I would never, I don't do it today even. And that's where our grandmothers, today's grandmothers, my age, have really done wrong to themselves by taking the children over. So they have no control over their grandchildren. My children can walk in this door. There's things they know they can't do because their parents taught them. They don't talk back to grandma. You don't do this. I have seen and heard children at powwows and stuff, how they talk that bad language. And I don't, you know, you yourself allow your son to come in your home drinking, your daughter to come in your home drinking, it's your own fault. Because if you nip it at the bud, I never did ever have to send any of my kids away because I never drank. I never cared to drink. Their dad drank. I have a son now that it likes to drink. He works. He's got a ranch and everything. He has his weekdays that they go out, you know, and they have to go out or whatever. But none of my daughters drink. One daughter used to. But I think that it's, you know what I tell my kids? This last night, one of my granddaughters was sitting right there, and she said, Angel used that word, you know, the bad word they go around using. So I said, you know, Teddy, I've told you many times, it's the way they hear you talk. You know, I told you 100 times, if not 150 times, is they pattern after you. You are their mother and you are their father. So they pattern after what you do, how you talk, how you express yourself. You think they're not listening. You got another thought coming, because that's just exactly the way that these kids are being raised today. And it's really sad, because I said, the language you kids use in your own home, I don't let them smoke here. They never ever, they don't, I don't say, don't come in this house. I don't have to put up a sign, because they know that they can't smoke here, you know, or they can't come here. I have one grandson, that one that was here when you came, that little boy. Now that little boy was born, they weren't married, but he's a good father, but he likes that. You can't stop them, you know, but they don't come here. They have that much high respect for me that they don't come around here. And that's where the downfall is for our grandparents, my age today, to allow them to come in your house and take over, cuss around, and, you know, just, I don't allow that. And they know it, so they don't. And I always said that to some of my friends, you know, if you allowed it, that's what they think they should do, and walk all over you. But that respect is so, today it's really, I hear it all the time when I'm at different places, you know. One time I was walking up to the chow line, the powwow, and these young men were standing, young boys were standing, and oh, they were talking some bad language. So I said, you know what, boys? I said, do you do that in your home with your grandmother or your mother, father? Kind of looked at me, you know, and I said, you know, that's wrong. You shouldn't talk like that in public places. And if a few more of us would say that, maybe they would, you know, be ashamed to talk like that in front of elders. It's one of the very strict things that my mother taught us, to always respect our elders. High respect for them. They come first, you know. You walk away, out of the way, and give them the right of way, because that's the thing to do, but it's not like that anymore. So I think if they would learn that young now. You know, the Head Start program, I always said this, that they should have elders right from the beginning in the Head Start programs, even if they had to hire elder ladies to go in and teach them these kinds of things. Teach them the some of the language. I have a little granddaughter. Oh, she's going to be 8 years old now, and Sunshine was in my home the first year her mother moved back from college, and I told her, I'll babysit for you this year, this school year, while you're working. But I said, after that, you have to find, So I taught her a lot of Indian words, like sugar. And then one of the things that they were so shocked at her, and then I taught her how to say them. People that would hire them to go into the Head Start to teach them even the basic words, what they mean, and what. And pepper, pepper is a hard word to say. And I taught Sunshine. I told her do you want to learn how to say salt and pepper and sugar and all that? She could really, and I'd teach her how to say it right. So I said Yamanumanu kapi, and she would say it just like I tell her. And so she went to school one day here in Mobridge, and so the teachers, they're talking about being Indian, and so Sunshine said, and she looks like a little white girl anyway, her dad's white, so she said, teacher, I can talk Indian. She told us to her mother, Sherry, she said, I can talk Indian. So she, can you? She said, yeah, I can say sugar, and she was telling her, and I know how to say pepper. And she said it, I guess, of course, teacher didn't know what it meant, or how you say those things. So she said, was she really pulling my leg, or was she really? No, she said, my grandma taught her how to say these words. So I always say that Head Start should have, even now, they're just in their learning stage. This is where that should start. They should start with. Because I went to Head Start over here at Wakbala one time here, a year or so ago, and my granddaughter came home. She was working in Head Start over here, and she said, Grandma, she said, they said we have to teach these kids Indian. How do they expect you to teach them? You don't even know yourself. What kind of thinking do they have? Because I said, it should be somebody teaching you first. Then you can go from there and teach them. So then I went over there, and this one gal, she's from Bullhead, and I knew that she was raised, her mother's a full-blood Indian, and I knew that they talked their language all the time. And I said, Pauline, I said, are you teaching your little, your group Indian words? And she said, I don't understand. Like you're ashamed that you knew how to understand or even talk it, And there's where the teaching should start. The values of what, right from the beginning, because there's so many of those children I've observed. I've gone to them. I've observed these little children that are born syndromes. And it's really sad. How do they expect the poor little kids to learn anything when you don't practice it yourself, I guess maybe I'm getting all tangled up here, but I'm just saying what I can remember, just one thing that I can see that come good from all the Indian powwows. The Indian powwows today are a vast difference from when I was a child. I'm sure they lived their childhood as we lived ours, so it's kind of hard to me, there was never no anger or, with my grandmothers. They're always soft-spoken, and like I said before, that you honored your brothers and sisters and, your kin. That was one of the high honors that we were taught, to respect one another and respect yourself, and that has to be the beginning of respect. And they're honoring their children, and I didn't remember when they they honored them when they named them. I know that's one of the things. Today they honor them in a lot of different ways. You know, the I don't know. Let's see. I lost my train of thought here.
Maybe you could share about Inila and how that was the way the people.
Well, the Inila part is like my grandmother always said, just be quiet and walk away from those things. You know, don't dwell on things that are being said. You know, there's just you. Have something to say to one another and something you don't like, then they tell you to just be quiet and walk away from it. A lot of the be quiet business came from when they themselves were growing up and had to be quiet all the time. So you at night they tell you to be quiet, go to sleep, you know, and then if you're fighting with your brother or sister, you tell them to be quiet. Don't, you know. Inilang kapi, you know. So that Inila is used in many different ways of being, because Inila means be quiet in Indian. So there's different ways of putting that into whatever it may be.
Conflict resolution, things like that.
Yeah. And you know, you're talking about respect. I think we talked about that, about respecting everything. You know, your religion, your peers, your teachers, your priest, all those kinds of things were taught to us just every day. It's kind of an everyday thing that we learn just from listening, you know. You're taught to listen because in their day they had to listen for every little move, you know, when they were going through all the turmoils that they were going through in their day, traveling from one camp to the other, you know. And so I don't remember of them teaching us anything about those kinds of days that they had in their, you know, I was too young, you know, too young to remember those kinds of things. But the everyday teachings has always been that how I taught my children. My mother, you know, was really strict with us in our going to church and having respect for one another, and the everyday things that we have to learn to stay away from.
So maybe you could share a little bit about when you were young and went to church. What was church like, the activities?
Well, I'll tell you, I was raised in two different denominations. I was raised by my aunt in Episcopal church. Then, of course, I was baptized Catholic. So when my mother took me back then I had went back to the Catholic religion. I went to the mission school and had to make my first communion and get confirmed and all this and that. And so I really know both religions, and I like to sing. I love to sing, so I sing with the hymns in Indian. That I go, if I go to wakes or funerals or whatever, I have my hymn books I take along, and I sing with them, you know, because I love to sing. And that's one of the things that I was taught by my aunt. And I think I would have been playing the organ today if my uncle would have lived, Uncle Charlie would have lived, because he was teaching me how to play the organ, and then he died all of a sudden. And he marked all the keys for me on the organ. I just remembered, you know, where to. And I regret to this day that I you know, he didn't live long enough to teach me, because I would be playing in a church gladly today. You don't find very many people playing the organ anymore in the church. No singing. But, so, and Gene, he's a converted Catholic. His parents were Episcopals, and then when he married Irene, he turned Catholic. I also remember the minister over here at Wakbala, they invited us over there for something. And so he said, "Jane, did you sign your name?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "He signed his name." I said, "Did you know?" I said, "He was a converted Catholic." "Oh boy, Jane, we got to convert you back." Laughing at. But he's a good Catholic, Gene. He's never have to tell him he's got to go to church or anything. He goes. That's one thing. My mother was a devout Catholic. She was really strict with right or wrong. You know, we had to live by rules. We had to live by rules that were. That's one of the things I know that is valuable too, that I taught my children, because we were taught right from wrong. And like just say for instance, you don't take anything of mine. You know, like my mother said, my sister was, she always told us, don't you take anything, even when you work, we go out to work, clean house or something, you don't take anything of anybody else's, you leave it there, because it's not yours. And she was really strict with things like that, you know. So she used to give us each 2 nickels. She'd give us each 2 nickels, and there was a movie, silent movies that would come on, you know. She gave us each a nickel for the movie and a nickel for candy, or whatever we wanted, you know. For a nickel, we'd buy lots of them days, you know. So then my sister, my oldest sister, Marion, she spent her dime. So then she knew where Mama kept her. She knew where Mama kept her change purse. So Mama's bed was right here. I could just see her bed was here, and then the door here, and then her dresser was there. So she said she wasn't quite sleeping. She was laying there, just resting her eyes, she said. Here my sister comes sneaking in, you know, just sneaking in. She's watching her one eye all that time. Snuck over to the dresser, and she opened it slowly, and she took out, Mama's dug it out on purse, and she put it in, and she took just the dime, all right, you know, probably all Mama had left, you know. So she put it back in, and then just as she was getting back, "Where are you going with that, boy?" So then my sister got a good spanking from that. You learned once a spanking you learned from the right from wrong. That's where I always try to tell the kids. Once you give them that warning in such a way that they won't forget that that's wrong. And my sister always said, I learned a good lesson from, you know, taking something that wasn't mine, you know. Yeah, it's so. Those are kinds of values, you know, the teachings that we got, and um, yeah, they're. So you taught your children what you were taught, and one of the things that I like I said, I regret was that the punishment that they gave us, we gave to our children. Today we're telling them not to do that to our little grandchildren. You set them down, talk to them in a nice way, as to be yelling at them, you know, and even in Head Start, you know, I noticed that they because that's the way they're raised, you know, and that punished our kids by spanking them, you know, and hitting them. And I'm not saying I didn't do that, because that's the way we were. Yeah,
Tell them about your puppy story.
oh, that's a story, I guess. She wants to hear a story about my day, and like I said, my grandmother and I spent this time in a tent that winter, and along came the spring of the year, I think it was. I was so young, but I think it was in the spring of the year. Somebody came by and gave me a puppy, and just had got off of nursing, you know. So then my grandpa didn't bother it, you know, she didn't say anything, and I'd always tell her to feed it, and I'd go to school, and I'd come back, and the puppy would be there. So along toward how long it was, I came back one day, and she was cooking something outside there, and I asked her, I said, "What are you cooking, Grandma?" And she said, "Oh, I'm cooking chicken," she said. So then I began to look for my puppy, and it was gone. This plump, oh, she said, she's helping me look for it, you know. And then she said, must have went over in the road and somebody took it. All that time, I ate my own puppy. Mm-hmm. She was cooking that puppy instead of the chicken, you know. So then I never knew that till later years, of course, that my grandmother that's what she done with that puppy of mine. And I told my kids, I think I've eaten everything that we had to. That was what their meals consisted of, just blinking. But you know, I was already married when this all came about. Like I said, they had from Fort Yates to Cannonball, you drove in timber all the way up there through the river. Beautiful, you know, I can remember that. Then coming back down towards Kinnell, that was from Fort Yates clear on down, was all timber. So we had people living down in the timber. They built their log houses down in there, maybe on the side of the timber, and some of them had cattle down there, and they never put up a spear of hay, because it was just like having sheds down in there, just thick everything down there. And I always remember my grandmother, Grandma Halsey, she said to me, I always remember, she said to me one time, we're going to go down to the river now, and down the woods, she said, and we're going to eat makato mirje. So I said, what's that? She said, that's mouse beans. So I said, okay. So, we went. So I went along, and she's going along, I was following her, and under certain trees, there would be this mound. So she would see how they preserve things in them days for the next batch, the next year, or. So then she reached underneath like this, where the mound was like this, and she reached like that, and she reached like that, and she would get underneath and make a kind of a hole there, and then she'd take her fingers like this, and she would pull out so many beans. Can you get it? She would pull out so many beans out of this. She would pull so many beans out from. She wouldn't take the whole lot that was in that mound. She would open up a little bit there, and she'd take so many beans out of there and put them in her apron, and then she'd cover this all back up again. So every mound we went to, that's how. And they were they call them mouse beans, but they were red beans that the mice would take, and then of course they put it away for the winter. They'd put these beans, so there'd be a pile there, and then that's how this pile would be covered with dirt, see, themselves, the mice. So then of course, she always cooked the beans, and then we always went swimming down there, and they kept their, like I said, they kept their cattle fed during the winter. They never had. There was always warm down there because there was no big winds, lots and lots of timber, and your fruit trees. How these later years must have washed up seeds or something where they grew up into the, towards the hills. Some of them grew like the cherries and juneberries and fish. Some of them all fished. Always went along the. Now we have to have all kinds of room. They had log houses down there, maybe 1 or 2 rooms at the most. Log houses along, the river. Below Fort Yates, they were all houses down in there too. Down in the out of the wind, The old hospital was up on top, and you go down and you look down over the hill like that, and a lot of houses were down below Fort Yates there. Later years they built a football diamond down in their later years. But I can remember the roads were down in the river, along the river in the timber, out of the wind, and the old office buildings are still there yet. When I was young, they had the commissary buildings where they used to store their food and stuff. The winters were pretty tough in them days too. And so traveling was, you had to travel with the sleigh, team and horses. I remember one year, my first husband was working horses, and always worked, they had worked broke horses. So they'd snag them and get them in and teach them to drive or teach them to ride. And this one time, we had a team that. Excuse me. Shut that off. Hello. Well, he had this. That's how we never hardly ever had a car, and my kids were small. Always drove around on a team. I rode horseback. I rode a lot of horseback in my younger days. Anyway, he had this bronc on one side and a team, and in order to break them, they go quite a ways. And Kennel was our place to go down and buy groceries. So I got in there. We were going along, and we were down this one long down the hill, and then up. Then on the side hill was some Abel White, his name was living there, and that grandma had 16 dogs. She had 16 dogs. So when you went by there, they all came and they're all barking at you. And so here, just as we got up top the hill going, here come those dogs. And they scared this bronc. so so it took off, and I should have known that he guides this. He guides this with a tame horse, guides this bronc, so that he was turning them, and we were going right for this. Looked like we were going to go down over the bank. You know, there's a big long creek there. I thought we were going to go that way, and he was guiding it, so he knew what he was doing, and I didn't realize it. And I jumped out in the hind. I got a big scar here. That iron wheel wagon we had, so it hit me in the seat here. And then I rode down to Kennel and come back the same day coming back. And next day I couldn't even walk, and when I did sit, I had to sit on the side like this. So finally, so then no car, no other way to get to the hospital but to go to Kennel. So I had to ride in the back of that iron wheel wagon, shaking me all the way to suffering, all the way to, and that was about like, they say 15 miles to Kennel. I had to juggle her all the way back down to Kennel, and then somebody had a car there that he hired to take me to the hospital. And I was in the hospital for about a week. I had that hit me and injured the bone, and so then they had to, there was a big hole, they had to pack that, in, and so that was one episode that I went through with horses, and them days we went horseback to the store or else in the wagon, and I don't know, there's a lot of things that, what I told my granddaughters today, I said, you kids, I was telling a story every once in a while, I said, you kids would never survive in a month the way we had to live. That's not like running down here and getting a loaf of bread. You had to have all that stuff at home so you could make a meal out of practically nothing, those were the days. And then they did their haying with teams, and so that's why I always say you can't get along without a woman. I had to rake hay, to drive the team and rake hay, and they put up hay and take all my kids. I'd fix lunch. Sometimes it would be just chicken and bread. I'd raise a lot of chickens, so I'd fix fried chicken and whatever, and then take the kids, and they'd have to sit down out under the wagon, while I was raking. then pretty soon I'd be crying, calling me, so then I'd have to stop and drive over there and see what the beef was about. They were fighting, straighten them out, and then get back on the rake and go back again all summer long, putting up hay with horses, and have tractors and such stuff like that, I just remember one. So then this car was coming down the hill, and I said, there's pointing, so I looked and I seen this car coming, finally it come down, got there. So they were calling me, so I drove the team over there, and this guy got out of the car, and I was so sunburnt, that my brother didn't even know me. That was my brother that came from Pembina, North Dakota, to see me. He didn't even recognize me. I was so sunburnt, from being out in the sun. Yeah, there are a lot of good times in them days, I guess you'd call them. Yeah. Everything had to be done by hand, just. Yeah, so they all raised gardens along the river, gardens, and I know my old grandma and them, how they used to dry everything. You take the squash, big Hubbard squash, and peel it all off, and then they go round like this. They just kind of cutting around like that and make it be just curly when they'd come out like that, and then they'd hang it up, hang them up to dry. They dry the cherries. My grandma had a big canvas, and she'd put it on her lap like this. Then she had this big stone, kind of dished in the middle, It was kind of dished in the middle, and then they had the round deal like that and a handle on it. And it was kind of flat on the bottom. So we'd go picking cherries, pails of cherries, and then come back, and then Grandma would set herself down on the ground and put this canvas on her lap. And just think of how much patience they had in them days. She'd take 5 or 6 cherries, and then she'd pound these 5, or keep going like that till she had a pile here. Then she'd push it off onto the canvas. They'd go on the same way. On pretty soon she'd have a pile. Then they'd make them into like patties. Then they'd just put them on a canvas on the ground like that. Just put them all over like little hamburgers, all over to dry. That's how they dried their cherries. And the June berries, they just dried them the way they were. And the cherries, of course, they pounded them. They pounded those. So. And the plums, they took the seeds out and they dried them like that. They dried them that way for the wojapi, I guess they had sugar in them days. I guess they them had sugar in them days. They didn't use much. Then they made the wojapi, with either any berries. And the buffalo berries, they would take, it had to be a certain time of like in September. And then they'd take a canvas and they'd put that canvas all under that buffalo berry tree. And then they'd pound the top like that. They just pound the top. Then they take them home and they just spread them all out on canvas, and that's how they dry them. Turnips they dig and even to the like I said, they used every part of the cow. They never wasted nothing. So the insides they would. I remember doing that. They'd have the guts. They eat. They like I said, they ate everything. They saved nothing. I mean, they didn't throw away nothing. So then my grandmother, they'd wash these guts and then they'd have us blow them. Not all of them, but certain part of the, I forget, they call it the straight gut. And then we'd blow them all up, and they're just like balloons, but like those long balloons like this. And then they'd tie them on the ends, and then they'd hang them up to dry. So to cook them in the wintertime, that's how they preserved all their food, their meat. I never did really learn how to make papa, the dried meat, because they know the best part of the papa would be the hind quarter, the big part. So they take pieces of that, and then they know just where the fold is where they have to cut, they cut that. And I know my aunt used to make great big, of course it had to be a big cow too, so they'd make these great big papas and hang them up. And I also remember my mother, she came down, Sam butchered, and so we had my mother and my aunt and them all came down to make papa down out home, so they were out all there and here. So my mother took 8 of those big the big dried meat home to Fort Yates. So when they weren't quite dry yet, and she didn't want to hang them outside because she said that they'll all know I have meat, and then I'll have to be, sharing. So she hung them in the house, and so my aunt came, is one that they kind of didn't trust, So Aunt Agnes came, so Mama was getting sick then, so she said, Agnes, she said, could you go in the house and make some soup for me? But it's store-bought meat, she said, it's in refrigerator, she said. She said, and she went. So then she brought her out a bowl of soup. So she said, Mary, I'm gonna go over here and I'll be right back, she said. So she went. So when she started to eat that soup, it tastes like papa. It tastes like that dried meat in there, beside the other meat. So Mama got up and she went in the house, and sure enough, 2 of her big dried meats was gone. So what she did was she cooked one of them and then wrapped up that meat and she put it in her sack. So then Aunt Agnes was gone. So then Mama went in and she found that 2 of her dried meat was missing. So she knew where the taste came from because she boiled them in the same as she did the boughten meat, and then took it out and was put it in her sack. So she looked in her bag there, and so she took out the one that wasn't cooked and she hung it back up where Agnes took it from, and she just let her have the ones that she cooked. I always remember Mama saying that, can't trust that Aunt Agnes. No. Funny things, you know, the stories. I'd have to tell you a story about my grandfather. My mother's father was Sam Halsey. And he, the women, like I said, waited on the man in them days, hand and foot. So I remember I stayed with my grandma, and gee, I couldn't figure out. So my grandma just whistling around there, waiting on him, and he said, "I'm gonna go to town today." That's what in Indian he'd tell her, he's going to town today. So she'd run and get the basin, water in the basin, and then she'd get his shave. They had this long, what they call them? They call where they shave with the long blade or the handle on it. She'd get that and she'd wash his face with soap all over his face, you know. Then she'd shave him. Sit there, he'd just be sitting there, and Mama used to get so mad at her dad. She'd shave Grandpa, you know, because he's going to go to town. She'd shave him all up and everything, and then he'd say, "Willie, get the team." My Uncle Willie was kind of slow, big, tall. I think he was 7 something. And so he'd go with him, and they'd hook up the team and stuff. And that wound up team would be just so Grandma would have to stand in front and hold them horses' bridles until my grandfather got in the wagon, settled down nicely, and then she'd have to get away. Mom used to just get so mad at him because she used to just wait on him like a king, you know. That's why those days the men sure had it made. And, but you know, when I was telling you about the vast difference in them days and today, you never seen a man and a woman going around together, let alone going around on a laundromat. Today they go in a laundromat and do the laundry. You know, a lot of the men do the laundry now. Fold the clothes and everything. I've seen that happen. I said that the change sure had come from the days when I had to wash on the washboard and hang them out, you know, freezing weather. We only lived in a 2-room frame house, bedroom, front room, everything in one room, and the kitchen, one room. In the winter time, the stove would go out. Why? Get up in the morning, the water, if you didn't empty out the water pail, it'd be froze solid. Gosh, you know, how we ever survived in them days is beyond me. I guess it was just the time. I said to the girls, you guys have it to snap today. We had to haul the water in to wash and out to empty it out. All chop wood. But you know, our kids had chores to do in them days. Our kids all had something to do. If they weren't working in the garden, each one had something to do. They had to have the chips picked in the evening for the morning fire, you know, and the boys used to be big enough then they'd have to chop wood for the night, and they were out helping their dad do something. And now the kids have nothing to do. It's just no wonder they get into such things as they do. And they don't know what it is to sit down at a meal anymore, kids, you know. They don't have,
They don't have any horses.
yeah. Them days too, they had horses, you know. The kids had horses, they always had something to do. Riding horseback or... And the things that I went through, you wouldn't believe sometimes. There was a time and place when they started to when they had to ship cattle, they'd bring the whole herd clear down to Wakpala and horseback, and I used to have to ride to help. And they'd bring them down to the stockyards, and then they would load the calves up, and then have to chase the cows back home. See, it's 19 miles, so across would be probably about 15, 16 miles when you were cutting across. So this one time, then I had to drive the team home because Sam had to take the calves to Sioux City, go on the freight train. So I was going home with the kids and the team, and no, the kids were home. I remember somebody was there, so they were home. So I had the saddle horse tied on the side, and I was going home. And just as I was going to go down this long hill, I thought I should let this saddle, he'd go home. I knew, so I untied him and I let him go. So he went. Went up the hill. So just as I went down the hill like this and up, the double tree broke, and the team took off and took me and you know, I had the lines, and they said, don't ever let that team get away. You let them run away once, they're always going to run away. That was in my mind. So I hung on to that team, so they dragged me out of the wagon, dragged me up the hill. I was all skinned up. But I just hung on to them till they stopped. And so then of course we had no other way to go anywhere, so we stayed home until he came home. About 5 days he was gone. And I was all skinned up anyway, and got home, and when he came back and he seen that wagon there, and he sure came home all eyes, because he thought that somebody was hurt. I was hurt, you know, but geez, I must have been tough them days. I said, all the things that we had to do and the hard things that we did in our life. Just no running water, no inside toilet, you know. Then one time too, my storytelling, this lady, he never had any money, never ever had, you know, extra money for things, and so that's why I think you appreciate what you have today, you know. And I tell my kids, your kids waste so much. You buy too much for them. That's why they don't want, you just can't buy them a simple thing anymore. They want better, bigger things, you know. Yeah, you're not teaching the children the values because of the way you know, shower them with everything, and every time they ask for, you know, it's nothing for them to give them $10, $15, $20 nowadays, you know. My kids were just talking about it this morning. They said, remember when Dad used to go to town, ride horseback to get groceries because we didn't have a car, and he'd go bring back groceries on the back of what few he could carry on the back, and he always brought us a black cow, each a sucker, you know. They were nickel then, big sucker. They were satisfied with, you know, they didn't have, no wonder they have good teeth today. You know, today the kids have to go to the dentist every other week. Yeah, they're see what else.
Maybe this would be a good time to share about what happened when the dam started to come in and how everybody got uprooted from along the woods, along the river.
Well, just what you hear today, you know, they were against it, but it went through anyway. You know, they didn't want to, and I think the realization came later, after maybe a year or so, of what all they lost. You know, what all they lost within their homes, that they had to move, because along the below where we lived, there was only, let's see, 1, 2, oh, say maybe 5 families that had to move out, because we lived up on the hill. We lived way up, but no flood could ever get to us, you know. But using that land, using the land for the cattle and horses and stuff, you know, that took away all that from our you know, perspective, looking at what they lost because of the and then the preserving all your you know, trees, the wood for warmth, and your berries and whatever they had to, you know, they used the lumber, they used the trees to make their own log houses, and how they learned how to do that. Like I said, there's so many things that they did in their day that today takes education. They knew how to cut the logs, how big to cut them, how round to cut them, and how long, and they had to notch them until so that they fit in, and then they would they would take they had to have certain dirt, certain dirt to make the plaster.
Yeah.
I don't remember what kind of dirt. Must have been some kind of clay mixed with whatever dirt that they, because today they use gravel and stuff, you know, they use sand. Maybe they use sand too, maybe not, because that sand would crumble. But then they'd take that and they'd have a big tub, and they'd just work that dirt like that, and then they'd just take their hand and they'd plaster, you know, plaster every log like that all along. They never plastered the inside, but they were warm houses, you know. They never had no floor. They used a canvas and stuff in them days. They just didn't have no floor. And then, because I remember White Bulls, when he'd go up the river, we'd go up the river and going to Kennel, we'd go down and go up the river. We'd pass Frank Martin's. Then White Bulls, they had about, I think they had 7 boys and maybe 3 girls. Maybe so you'd come over the hill and you'd see all these little kids playing outside in a 1-room log house. Just 1 room for that many. You'd come over the hill and you'd see all these kids playing. And I was just talking to one of the boys the other day at the restaurant, Doug. I said, I remember you boys when you were little. I said, we used to be going to Kennel, and I said we'd come over the hill and we'd see you all playing outside. So we'd have to go down one hill and up and then go to their place. You wouldn't see a kid in sight. That's how bashful, and you know, they were never around people like they are today, you know. So I'd wonder, where in the heck did all those kids go to that first time that we went there? And so I was sitting there, and I thought I saw something, so I looked, and there was 2 beds there, and all those little kids were laying under the bed, all their eyes peeking out. They're scared of the company, you know. They didn't know, they were bashful. I was telling that to Doug. I said, you are one of them laying under the bed that's hiding from us. Then they'd probably have, for their own family, they want to feed you, you know. Maybe it was just bread and tea, you know, but you never refused. You just went ahead and there were Indian people are very, very kind, very kind. I know at one point in time, I remember too, my grandma's time, when Grandma Alice and them were living, when somebody died, they immediately, everything was gone out of the house. They just gave everything away. They didn't have nothing. Because this is what their saying always was. If I broke something, my grandma always said, "That's all right." She'd say, "That's all right." She'd say in Indian, "They make those things every day. They're just material things. They make them every day. Don't cry," you know. And that's very true. Material things didn't mean that much to them. That's why they were so kind, I guess. They just really outgoing with their kindness. That my granddaughter brought me, said this little one that was here, her sister, she sent me a big cooler full of June bears yesterday. Yeah, she brought me a cooler full of, well, not quite full, but June rays. I'm planning on having my own personal feeling about honoring people after they're dead and gone. I don't believe in that. My philosophy is if I can't do it, if I can't take a flower to a friend in a hospital while she or he is living, then I don't believe in taking them after they're dead and gone. And I'll tell you a story behind my feelings about that honoring business is, sure, it's okay, to do the things after they're dead and gone, it's always been that way, I guess. So this one man, they amputated his leg because of being a diabetic, and him and his wife are not together anymore. And so he kept losing his kids, and he finally got to this one, I think, son died. So I went to the wake, and I was sitting there looking at Bert, and he's sitting there all alone. His wife was sitting over on the other side with their kids. So I went and I sat by him, and I said, "Bert, are you still a Catholic?" "Yeah," he said, "I never did quit the Catholic Church. All my kids and my wife was up to the mission, the Episcopals," he said. So I said, "Now that you're not well," I said, "would you like to come back to the church?" He said, "Yeah, nobody ever asked me," he said. So I said, "Well, if you're willing to come back to the church, I will talk to Father. I can't say you can do this or that, but I'll talk to Father and tell him that you want to receive communion." He said, "Okay." And I said, "I'm a Eucharistic minister, so I can bring you communion," I told him. So he was really glad I talked to him. So then I talked to Father, and then that next Sunday he went to visit him. And I didn't realize he was living in such a bad situation. Maybe God just pointed me that way to talk to him, because so Father said, "Now you can take communion to him." So that next Sunday I took communion. Jean and I always went to visit him on that day. So we went to see him, and he had no table in the house, just a bed in there and a box there where I suppose he ate, and he was in a wheelchair. And so I said, "Bert, I came to pray with you and give you communion." And he said, "Okay," he said. So I was visiting with him, prayed with him and visited with him. And so every Sunday he and I would go and take him communion. Sometime to one time we went and his boys were in the front room there all drinking, and he was in the back bedroom. So we just went in there and shut the door, and I gave him his communion and talked to him. And so he said, I was really happy to go back to the church, he said. And he said, you know what I'm thinking about doing? He said. So I said, what? He said, I'm thinking about going to Fort Meade and get my limb so that I can. So I said, oh, that would be great. I said, you can go, and then you can come to church, or if you want to come to church, somebody could come and take you. I said, maybe we can do that too. So I was visiting with him like that, and he said, so I'm just gonna talk to the CHR to have them take me to Fort Meade. Boy, the next week he was gone. He died. And I've never ever had such a kind of a bad feeling at the time when they had the wake, and nobody recognized him as a veteran. And all the medals that he had a Purple Heart, he had all the medals and stuff that he had, they were showing after he's dead and gone, you know. The next day, and I was kind of bitter, inside, because they had 2 pickup loads of flags and drums playing singing Indian, taking him. And I said, why now? You know, why are you honoring him now when he doesn't even know you're honoring? Been in the war, and nobody ever cared two hoots about honoring. So the reason why I'm saying this was because that's what I'm going to do this coming August when we have our Wakbala powwow. He's a World War II veteran. He's a Purple Heart. He's got lots of background. So I went to talk to Marcella about it the other day, and was up there, and she said she'd help where she can. So and invite a friend of his that he was in college with. And that friend of his went to they went to war together. And they got out together. And he lives in Aberdeen. So people like that, I'm going to, be here with him so that. So I started saving things, and my kids are going to all help. My son-in-law thinks, that should be done now, not when, after they're gone. And so. Then there's Carl Duchnall and Frank Shooter and Pat McLaughlin are only World War II veterans that are left around Wakbala. There might be you've got about 3 or so in the 308. He has a 308. He's been a member of that for years, ever since he's out of the service. There's a few there that are was in the year. Yeah, so my belief is honoring them when they're here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some.
Would you share some advice to today's parents?
Well, like I always say, you brought those children into this world. And I said it before, that when these children start learning, they're learning from you as parents, both mother and father. They look up to you, they idolize you because you are their parents. They give you give everything that they learn from you when they're first learning, because that's where a lot of this learning comes in, and how you relate to them, how your actions are towards them in trying to teach them in a subtle, nice way. We didn't have that chance, but today they have that chance, that all kinds of help to learn how to raise your children in a way of not hitting them, but you know, there's ways to stop a child from crying without shaking them up. They've even shaken them up today. I've seen in the paper here where they're injured one child's brain because of shaking him so hard, you know, a stepfather. And one thing, you know, that I know it's really hard is to have, for the younger children and remarrying. For myself, if when my husband died and my children were still young and needed me, I never would have got married. Never. I never would have gave that burden to him, and then have me having to, you know, defending my children all the time. If you can't share these things together, knowing that he had children, I had children, yet I got married, you know. So these if you can't share these burdens together, it's tough for the children. They're the ones that have to benefit by all the hurts and the bad things that are happening to them today. So they've got to really look inside themselves when they want to remarry after they're divorced or widowed, you know, or even the man should think of those things. You take over that responsibility and can't do it, and then the kids suffer. The suffering is so bad today for the poor little kids that have to go into welfare homes. I worked in a program one time. I said, they didn't listen to me because I wasn't highly educated. But I could see in this program that I was in, I was directing the elderly program for the Meals on Wheels. And above us there was a program going on. And this was, it could have been, a lot of it maybe nipped at the bud at the time because, for instance, when this mother was drinking, or both drinking, and the mother got in jail, you take that child out of the home because the mother's in jail, okay? Then you take that child, put it somewhere else. I said, here we have all these dorms here, old dorms that were there. They were could be into a shape where they could have this home for these kids. And that mother's in jail. You bring that mother back to this facility over here to take care of that child every day that they're in jail. Because, okay, here's that mother says, they want him so bad, let him have him. That's their feelings. But if you gave that child, that person, mother or father in jail, to bring it back to that child over here, but I wasn't educated enough, you know, they wouldn't listen to me. But if they would have done that, I think they'd have saved a lot of these kids. They would have saved them by that mother having that responsibility to come and wash their bottles, give them their bath, put them to nap, and spend the day with them, and then go back to jail at night if it had need be that way. And that was my outlook on the future of these kids. But no, they wouldn't listen to me because you know, I didn't have the arm's length degree like some of them, and yet I said they didn't have the common sense either, you know, to see through these things for the future. You know, what's really sad today is these casinos and these bingo halls.
We've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, so the bingo halls and the casinos are a downfall in many. It's not only in the Indians, you know, it's all walks of life that we go out there once in a while to eat, the one that's here. We go out there once in a while to eat, and I always say, might as well give my $10 to them. I'm going to lose it anyway, you know. But people go and spend all their money, and these little kids half the time have no parents at home in the evenings, you know, after schools. They're in school, all right, and then when school is out, And another thing that I can see, I always saw with my children, is I always say, if you have a clear conscience, you are doing what's right, and you're accused of something, you have nobody to fear but God, because He knows that you didn't do it. But if you did it, you have to pay the consequences. You have to pay whatever comes out of it, you have to pay. Because you did wrong. You knew you were doing wrong, but you did it, so you have to pay. That's what I have taught my kids all the time. But nowadays, the parents say they blame it on to everybody else and anything else, but the kids themselves, and they don't learn from that. They don't learn from doing wrong and having to pay. When my kids, just like for instance, at Wakbala, Halloween was a thing to tip over all the outdoor pivies, you know. And so it came to a point where the school, when the kids would do that, they had to go the next day and put them all back up, which they hated, but it was a lesson. They learned from that, you know. You learn from your mistakes. But today I know many parents, they stick up for their parents. They'll run to the jail and get their kids paid the fine and go without themselves getting their kids out of jail. When they knew that they were wrong, they have to pay for what they done. But it's just, you know, it's just what you teach them. Yeah, so, well, the children have to first respect themselves. You have to teach them to respect themselves. Then you start with teaching them to respect your own peers within your own family. And if you don't learn that, how do you expect them to respect when they get out of your sight? And that's one of the things that the parents have to, the children have to really look at also is to respect your brothers and sisters, respect your, whatever it may be around you, you have to respect, you know, even to a dog. If you mistreat a dog, that's disrespect, because God put that dog on this earth, you know, for a reason. So whatever is around them, it's you know, without learning respect from the families, from your own family, how do you expect to have respect for yourself even if you don't learn it? So from the time they're little, you have to teach them this. Teach them respect themselves. Like our grandmother always told us, the month comes around, you know, and all these kinds of things. See, our parents never told us these things, because they never were told exactly just how these things had to be. And so now we know everything. Everything today is here, right smack in front of our eyes and our ears. So we have no recourse to say, I didn't know that, you know, they didn't tell us that, because the kids know more than we do today. You'd be surprised, you know, of what the kids know today. So then when you know they know it, it's easier for you to explain things to them. It's easier for you to tell them, you know, it's wrong. I have a daughter, this older granddaughter that I raise. She tells her daughter just like it is. So you have to sit down and tell them in a way that, you know, they think it's bad when you tell them these things, because we thought it was bad, you know. So the kids have to learn just like the adults had to learn, you know, how to have respect for themselves. So take you a long time to, I mean, it takes a while to remember back, you know, some of the things, and I'm sure I could think of a lot of other things after you're gone. But us up to all the questions you have, or just
Mhm.